Everybody to the Rob Ellis Show, and this is our second installment of it. We had the debut last week with Ray Didinger, and it couldn't have gone any better. And if you're not familiar with the show, so each and every week, I get a chance to sit down with some people in the business that I admire, and we get a chance to learn their life journey, their career journey, what makes them tick, what motivates them, who inspired them, what helped them get to this point, and we're going to have a diverse group of people that we're going to talk to each and every week. And I thought, you know what? I've had the good fortune to speak to our next guest on quite a few occasions when we're talking about the NFL, the Eagles, the draft. I think he is the preeminent NFL reporter out there right now, whether it's reporting, insider information, you name it. And that's James Palmer from the NFL Network. He just does an absolutely unbelievable job. And we're going to bring James in right now to talk to James about that career journey. And there he is. He joins us from the Colorado area. James, how are you, my friend?
I'm good, Rob. I appreciate that, man. We go back a ways. I appreciate the kind words. And I was excited to jump on. I don't know if I'm going to live up to Ray, but I mean, we'll do our best in episode 2.
Yeah, I didn't make it easy on you, by the way, following
not
up
at all.
Ray. Yeah, that's like, what's the old adage in Hollywood? You don't work with like children or animals because you're just, it's a no-win situation. But yeah, that's a whole nother story. So James, I know a little bit of your background, but not a ton of it. And there's a couple of things that really I found interesting when I was doing a little bit of research on you. So I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit from when you were a wee lad up until present day. But one was, I think initially when you were at Ohio State, you were going to go into the teaching field, right? And how did you veer off of that into what you're doing now?
Yeah, Rob, my mom's a teacher. My sister's a teacher in the Philadelphia area still to this day. And I went to Ohio State because actually they had a teaching program that had the master's built in. And, you're teaching in Pennsylvania. I always thought about going home. And I was like, well, I know I'm going to have to take my master's eventually. I might as well get it out of the way right away. So everything was built into a 5-year program. And that's one of the reasons I went. And I love the Big Ten, and I wanted to go to a Big Ten school. My parents are from the Midwest, and they were big into, the Big Ten. And while I was there, something happened with my degree to where we all got kind of screwed, not going to lie, when they're switching it to a 4-year degree. And I had some time, honestly. And I was like, I'm going to turn this communications minor into a journalism major, which was a terrible idea because I essentially got 2 4-year degrees in 5 years. I was working my butt off.
Right.
But it really hit me because growing up, everybody, was like, you want to be on TV like your dad? But I fought it like crazy. I was like, no. I wanted to be a teacher. I love kids. And then I got an internship as part of that journalism degree with the Columbus Blue Jackets. And the NHL team had just started. And I was in the lock. And so they were brand new. So they were like, anything you can do to help would be great. I was like, can I write for the website? They're like, yeah. Can I interview players? They're like, yeah. So I'm going above and beyond, going to practice, doing these things. And I'm starting to write for the website. And I'm interviewing players in the locker room. I'm like, oh, man. No, yeah, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do. And so that internship really is the thing that made it snowball. Because I always had an interest. I used to log tapes for my dad back at Channel 6 when I was in high school and middle school and stuff, and helping them out if they were shorthanded and stuff. But when I had a chance to work for the Blue Jackets and talk to players and interview them and tell their stories, and then I worked for the Columbus Destroyers through that. I think Matt Nagy was the quarterback, I think, of the Destroyers back then, and the Arena football team. And then I was just like, man, this is what I want to do. Anything with television. Yeah. And I didn't really care about being in front of the camera or anything. I just wanted to be, the bug was just I love creating this. And I love that so many people come together to make one product. And I was hooked.
That's cool, man. Yeah. So I did my senior year at Temple. I did a 40-hour per week internship at Channel 10. Yeah. It's 30 credits. So that was the one that kind of got me on that road too, because I was a sport management major. I intended to work in a front office. Okay. But then, the bug kind of hit me as well as it did with you. You brought up something I think it's fascinating. So for people who may not know your dad, Scott Palmer, Scott worked for Channel 6, which is 6 ABC WPVI, as we know in the Philadelphia area, for a very long, had an incredible run. I mean, from 81 to 2005, for anybody who's been in the business, that's insane to be able to have that kind of sustainability. And, Jim Gardner, there's not very many, Washington, et cetera. He had a great run, but it's strange. I think you go one of two ways when your dad is in the business like that. And then you tell me, you either, I'm going to cut my own path here. That's not going to be the case. Or it's, I'm all in. You're Joe Buck if that's the situation.
Yeah.
It sounds like you pushed against it a little bit right away.
Well, you push against it when you're on the free throw line in high school, and the kids from the opposing team, like in the crowd, are like humming the Action News theme song. Like, no lie, that used to happen. Like,
are you kidding?
I'd be at the Stripe, Upper Marion High School, no big deal, and like kids say like we're playing Hatboro Horsham or Methacton or somebody, and it's like dun 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 dun, and they're doing it while I'm at the free throw line. I'm like, I gotta get out of here. Like, so I did push against it a little bit because everybody, I mean, he's brilliant at what he does. He's my hero. He's a great person. Yeah. But I kind of wanted to get away, and there's another reason why I wanted to go away to school is because I wanted to kind of blaze my own trail in a sense. But I did always like it. I've always made movies with my friends as a kid. I loved editing it, not being in front of the camera. Like, I love putting things together, like I said, with television. But it was those kind of experiences where it was kind of like, I think I got to do something for myself. So I pushed away, but now it's come like full circle. And now in my job, him and I have these great deep conversations. He watches everything I do, and he can tell, like, I know that they were talking in your ear while that whole last live shot was going on. I was like, yeah, I mean, Mixed Minus was terrible, Dad. Like, but you can't have these conversations with your father,
right,
unless they've been in the business. And so, like, our conversations now are amazing. But yeah, at that point, I kind of pushed away from it just because I kind of wanted to do my own thing.
Well, how much, like, you probably didn't, it didn't even dawn on you, I'm sure, when you're 8, 9, 10 years old, but you can have unique access, right? And to a locker room, or you have actually sat in a studio and watched, everything that goes on with the prompter, with a producer in your ear, with your IFB, all the stuff you just mentioned, the Mixed Minus. Was there anything sort of subconsciously, now that you look back and you say, this was all kind of grooming me to get here, even though at the time I didn't necessarily know it?
Yeah, I think there was a comfortability to it, right? Just being around it. I think you had a sense of just kind of like, when I first walked into my first job as a production assistant, you know what I mean? Like the lowest of the totem pole, doing every single odd job you can, just delivering scripts to talent, anything. I just had like a comfortable feel around a newsroom and a comfortable feel, within a studio. So I do think, like, growing up in it and kind of having that, sense of your dad's coming home, taking off his makeup every day is like, yeah, you get that feeling of like, you have maybe a little bit of an advantage over some other people because I didn't have a whole lot of fear, in all honesty, just because it was all kind of second nature to me. Famous people were just kind of like second nature to me. I mean, like, I remember in high school, I had my own phone line because my sister did, right? She goes off to college.
This is pre-cell phone, kids.
There's no cell phones, right? So I'm like, I'm going to get this own line that my sister had, and I'm going to use it. And I had an answering machine. I swear to God, the answering machine said, like, hey, I'm out doing something. You should be out doing something too, you loser. Like, that's what it said. Like, typical, like, 16-year-old kid, like a moron. And I press the button, and no lie, I hear this dude go, hey, man, I ain't a loser. I'm playing golf with Tiger Woods right now. It was Barkley. Literally calling me because I was like, I didn't want to shoot the basketball. My dad was like all upset. He's like, all I did was pass. And he's like, but I took the time to call you, man. I'm going to call you back anyways. And I'm like, what, am I an idiot? Wow. But I mean, I talked to him like a day later. We talked forever. That's just an example of, like, I had a comfortable feel around people that other people kind of like admired, just because they were kind of around a little bit. And my dad would introduce me to people at the vet or the Spectrum or stuff. I used to love going to Flyers games as a little kid. I'd go full gear, helmet, gloves, everything to the Flyers game. And like, so I did meet all those guys. And I think that made me, in sports specifically, just kind of have a real comfortable feel.
Now, did you also, because I know how my kids have been growing up, it's just like, dad's on TV, dad's on the radio. Who cares? Not who cares, but it's just, it would be like an accountant going to the office. It's not a big deal to them. It was that way too. Like, oh yeah, dad's on and you're, fixing a sandwich. Is it not a big deal?
Yeah. I think as I got older, for sure. My mom was still like my whole she VCR taped every single thing he did. Then they'd watch it again. And that wasn't like an aberration thing. It was like, let's keep getting better at this as like a family gig. But like, yeah. And the cool part was, and we all know this growing up in Philly, right? It's like all of my boys are my best friends from birth or like within kindergarten to second grade. So they could care less what he does. And I think that played a big part in it as well. It's like all of my best friends still to this day have never asked for a single ticket to a game, have never asked for a single thing ever but he's just Mr. Palmer. Like, that's all he is. He's James's dad. And so I do think that played a role in just kind of like, they don't care. Like, anybody come to the house never made a big deal about it. And I never really did either. Maybe when I got older and, during COVID, I sat him down and did this with him for like 3 hours. And he told me some stories that I'd like never heard. Like one of the first people he told that my mom was pregnant with my older sister was Richard Petty. They're having sandwiches on the infield on the ground of a racetrack, sitting there talking about kids. He's like, yeah, I'm going to be a dad. He's like, change the diapers. I mean, like, you had this conversation with Richard Petty or Bear Bryant or these people that he spent all this time with. I didn't really start getting that awe factor of kind of some of the things he accomplished until kind of later in life, because he's pretty modest. He didn't really like talk about those things very often at home.
That's cool. That is cool. Yeah. Well, and he also made a very seamless transition from sports to news. Now, did you ever consider, was it just such a love for sports? Did you ever consider, if you were going to do this, that it would be on the news side, or was it always sports for you?
No, Rob, I'm 100% more in love with the product and the creating of television than anything. Sports is just way more fun.
Gotcha.
I was a really good athlete growing up and played every sport imaginable all through high school. And just, I love sports. Yeah. But like the idea of, the graphics guy's going to do this and the AD is going to do this and the Chiron operator is going to do this and audio, that fascinates me. Mm-hmm. Like, news is pretty stiff for me. I'm a pretty laid back guy. If I was doing something like in terms of like the, ET or Hollywood or anything like that, I'd be all for it. Like the whole idea of like, I host another interview show on YouTube for another company that just like is like long form interviews that are just the whole process I'm in love with. I love telling stories more than anything. Mm-hmm. But I do think sports is like the greatest drama that we can have because of the unpredictability of it. So like that part of my love for stories and TV and sports is kind of the perfect backdrop to tell those stories. That all kind of comes together for the things that I value in my job and I love.
All right, for your job, and you are very objective when you cover the Eagles, I will tell you that. But
yeah, I do a decent
frankly,
job of that.
Were you an Eagles fan as a kid? I would assume you are, growing up in the Philadelphia area.
For sure. Yeah. I have Polaroids of like me on Jaws's shoulders. It's like me, him, and Herm Edwards, and I got like the helmet on. I'm like 3. And like, yeah, I definitely grew up an Eagles fan. I had the whole Hutch set. I know anybody my exact age knows about Hutch. Like when you got the helmet, the shoulder pads, the jersey, and the football all in one. Yeah, I was definitely an Eagles fan. Phillies, we had a Sunday ticket plan to the Phillies. And that was like, Phillies were like die hard. That was our favorite team in the house. But I was a big hockey guy, and obviously I love that Philadelphia's a basketball town because I love hoops. My mom loves hoops. We loved all the teams in Philly, but I think the Phillies were kind of number one in our house.
Mm-hmm. That's what your dad is, the Phillies ambassador.
Yeah.
What a title, man. How do I get that title? Unbelievable, man.
I felt
is that what does he make you call him that around the house when you guys are?
The ambassador's in. Yeah, that's what he says when he walks in. Yeah, the ambassador's present. Bow before me.
So let's look at. So you obviously you were involved heavily in sports at Upper Merion, where you went to high school. Was there any thought to playing in college? You obviously went to a big time school with Ohio State, which you have to be unbelievable. But did you consider that maybe as a path?
Yeah, I did, because I kicked for football, so I won't say I was really the greatest football player, but I played soccer, basketball, and baseball. And baseball was probably my best sport. I played in the Carpenter Cup at the Vet, the showcase there.
Yeah.
And I definitely had chances to play at smaller schools. Soccer, I had chance to play at smaller schools, but there was a part of me that kind of like, I don't know, Rob, if I was like either a little burned out, like from Legion ball and everything, and I was having arm issues too, and so I knew kind of like the baseball thing was going to be really tough. I'd have to have surgery, and in that sense. And then I was also like, man, I just want to go to a big school. I want the full vibe of meeting as many different people I can meet. That was my plan. And I was just like thinking to myself, like, man, if I end up getting hurt again, like it happened my senior year with my shoulder, and I end up having another surgery or whatever ends up happening, like, and then I'm going to be looking back going like, I wish I would have went there, because I wanted that. And I wanted to be a teacher, but I also wanted options. So I wanted every major under the sun. And I also wanted to go to a Big Ten school. Like that was something that I kind of desired. once I decided I didn't want to stay in Philly, because I think Philly's got great schools.
Yeah.
But since I wanted to leave, I was looking at what I wanted to do, and just going to a smaller school and playing ball kind of just fell by the wayside a little bit. It might have been, I'll be honest with you, might have been burnt out a little bit, might have been a couple of things, but I don't regret the decision I made by any means. I had an absolute blast. Stayed as long as possible.
Hey, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
Okay?
I think I was there for 6 football seasons.
That's
got a national championship or 2. Yeah.
Well, that's not bad. So, all right, now you have a decision to make because you have the dual major, as you talked about. So how much consideration was given to the teacher side versus, the other way? What was the tipping point for you, so to speak?
Yeah. I student taught. I still student taught, took the praxis, did everything. I was certified to teach. I had everything. And I was kind of like subbing a little bit and still hanging around kids when I got back to Philadelphia to kind of like, still see if that avenue was there. But I got offered a job at a Comcast entity called the Mountain West Sports Network, launching about the exact same time as Big Ten Network. Okay. And it was kind of the same thing, covering a college conference, the Mountain West Conference. I knew nothing about it, but I got offered a job when they were launching and I wanted it. And then I was like, I got to finish this other degree. So I finished the second degree, and then I was like, contact him again. I was like, if you guys are expanding or any sense, and they were like, yeah, in a couple months we will be. And and I got offered a job, and I just jumped. So it was like 2 months after I graduated, I kind of had like limbo of like, let's see which one kind of comes first. And that one came, and I was like, maybe this is serendipitous. So I'm going to go out. Colorado's my favorite place on the planet. Skiing's my favorite thing. Let's go out there and do it. And then once I got like in a newsroom on a daily basis, and I taught myself how to edit tape to tape back then. Everything under the sun. And it was a new, like I said, I got lucky with these things because like the Blue Jackets, it was a new entity, right? It was a new startup of a sports network. So it was like, go do this. So I created the website with another guy, and we just did things like top 10 plays of the week in the Mountain West Conference. Like I got a chance to talk to Tony Gwynn like every single week for a baseball show.
Yeah, because he was coaching at San Diego State.
Yeah. So like, it was all these cool experiences with a new network that allowed me to start doing all these different things. And that's where with the website and things, I started being like, I don't know, I think I kind of like this in front of the camera thing. I was still producing shows too as a production.
So you're doing both. You were kind of hopping behind the scenes and in front of the camera.
I would. And I did that when I went to Atlanta, which was my next stop. We had a talk show there hosted by the great Bob Neal.
Love Bob Neal.
Yeah. One of the huge mentor of mine and one of the greatest TV sports figures of all time. And I would like produce the show, front bench it one day, and then host it another day. And like it was a small shop, and I was like, oh man, I can do everything. But then eventually I had to make a decision because they were like, you can't keep doing both, which I wanted to. I love building shows and creating content.
I'm not trying to make it about me, but I had a very similar experience. So I used to produce a show called Daily News Live on Comcast.
I know it.
So eventually I started transitioning on the air too, and we would do remotes from over at Citizens Bank Park sometimes. So one time I did the show was an hour and a half. I did the first hour in the booth producing it, ran from the Wells Fargo Center over to Citizens Bank Park. I'm soaked because I'm in a dead sprint. Think of it, dodging fans.
Yeah.
I sit down on the set and I'm trying not to look like I just ran a marathon and I did the last half hour of the show.
But that's like a dream day.
It was great.
To do everything.
That's one of those, like when you're driving home, you're like, did I really just do that? Like that just happened. I'm a very fortunate individual.
That's
so
awesome.
All right. So you make the move. Then you head down south to Atlanta, like you talked about. Is that where that's where you had to make the call? Like, all right, I love doing the behind the scenes stuff, but I'm gonna go hard at this on air stuff.
Yep. That's exactly, because Atlanta is like a hotbed, man, for anybody who wants to. It's funny. I went the opposite, because if you want to work behind the scenes, go to Atlanta. Like I used to produce AAA Gwinnett Braves games in the truck. So I produced live events. I was an associate producer for Inside the NBA at night during the playoffs over at Turner, because that's down there. Then I worked at Comcast Sports Southeast. These are all like Comcast stops I kind of had.
Yeah.
But then there I was just like, I really got some encouragement from Bob and from some other people down there that were like, you're really good in front of the camera. I think you need to be telling stories in front of the camera. So when an opportunity came up that Comcast was opening Comcast Sportsnet Houston, a whole nother CSN regional, just like CSN Philly was at the time, I kind of jumped at the opportunity. Like, I think I got to go and do this. And I was right away, the first day I got there, I got a job as an on-air talent there. And the very first day, they're like, we want you to cover the Texans. And I was like, wow, all right. I've been covering SEC football, you know what I mean? And ACC football. So all right, let's do this. And I just got an NFL gig like right away. And I just dove into it head first. I mean,
That's perfect.
I just lived at the facility.
All right, hold that thought, because there's some foreshadowing. There's some fortuitous things that happen when you got to Houston, which may have led you to where you are today, which I want to get into. I do want to get your thoughts on the Eagles and Jalen Carter and the draft and those kind of stuff too. But I just love hearing the journey here. So when we come back, we'll dig a little bit more into the journey and the next couple of stops, because you aren't that far away from where you are right now. So we'll get into all of that when we come back. You are watching the Rob Ellis Show with my great guest, James Palmer. Right back in a second.
Hey Birds fans, the NFL schedule has arrived and Philly Sports Trips has all the details now. Visit the site phillysportstrips.com. This is sure to be an epic season. Be sure to go there now to make sure that you don't get shut out. Join us in Tampa, LA, Seattle, or when we get revenge in Kansas City. Don't want to fly? No problem. Gather up your crew and hop aboard one of our signature boisterous bus trips to DC or New York. Sign up now and make sure to mention A2D. Don't miss out on the best Philly fan experience anywhere. Philly Sports Trip customers always stay at the best hotels and meet NFL legends. Book today.
All right, we are back. Rob Ellis Show, A2D Radio Network, along with James Palmer, who is an Emmy Award winner. All right, so when we last took the time out there, James, you had just made the move to Comcast Sportsnet Houston, and you were assigned the Texans, which was, man, what a great opportunity that is for someone still relatively new in the business. So pick it up from there at that juncture and how that went for you.
Yeah. First off, not a very popular guy in the household, Rob. Moved my wife pregnant with our son at 8 months. And we loved the doctor in Atlanta, but apparently we had to get to Houston and start from scratch when we're about ready to pop. And so it was a while, and he was born October 28th, so like right in the middle of football season. But he knew what he was doing because he was born during the Texans bye week.
Perfect.
He was a genius of a child,
yes.
and still is. And so I just threw myself into it, and actually it was kind of funny because they were like, I was kind of like the digital reporter. Like I would do hits, and then we had an anchor on our talent that would also come. And he was like doing the game stuff.
Right.
I was doing all week of practice and putting together packages and like to speed this up. I just kind of like, he finally was like, man, this team's so much better than me. Like I got to bow out. And I just then took it all.
Oh, wow.
And so I would write. And my buddy who joined the beat my second year was Dave Zangaro.
Comcast Sportsnet Philadelphia, now NBC Sports Philadelphia. Yeah,
and he's the best. He's one of my best friends.
Love Dave.
And him and I just, I don't want to brag, but I think we took over the coverage of the Texans for the city. I mean, like really, Dave is a great writer, and he is a bulldog in a press conference. He's really, really good at what he does, and we played off each other really, really well. So it got to the point, and I was just loving it to where, I would be on we had essentially Daily News Live, essentially.
Yeah.
Same show. For an hour, and I'd be a guest on that every single day on all the football segments from the facility. And then as soon as that was over, I'd be live with a 3-minute package that I turned for the 6 o'clock. And then that would run again later. And that was every day. I never even really went to the studio. I was just at NRG Stadium every day. And I just started realizing that like, if you grind and develop really, really great relationships on a beat, you can start beating everybody. And that's what I did, specifically with players, because I was young, and that was what my advantage was, I think, over some of the other people in the market. Like John McClain, the general, Hall of Famer, another great mentor of mine who wrote for the Chronicle for 40 years. And is a big reason why they actually have a football team in Houston again.
Covered the Oilers back in the day. Yeah.
He had a huge part in getting the Texans to come to Houston, getting a team. But I also, he was a great mentor, but he was also slowing down a little bit, and he helped me with a lot of things, and he wasn't on the grind like he was with Dan Pastorini 30 years prior. Right. And so I just started just living it. And it was awesome. Even though the team struggled at times going through a coaching hiring, and then Bill O'Brien coming in when Gary Kubiak got let go and all these different things, I developed awesome relationships with JJ Watt and guys like that. And those played huge dividends for me when I got to NFL Network. But I think our on-air product was incredible. It was incredible. But the network was essentially doomed from the start with the way it was set up. No knock to Comcast, the Astros, or the Rockets. It was just a bad business model in a sense. And we ended up, all losing our jobs and all getting laid off. But the day I got laid off, literally the day I got laid off, Mark Watts, who was the head of talent at the time in NFL Network, called me and was like, I want you to come to NFL Network. And I was like, oh,
wow.
this is perfect.
Now, did he know that I'm assuming he knew everything.
He did. Yeah, I'm
Right.
assuming he knew, and that's why. But he and he sought me out, and now I didn't know this was going to be a 9-month waiting process of, hey, you're going to come to NFL Network. Hey, you're not. Hey, yeah, I think you are. No, you're not. Back and forth forever. We're living in friends' basements with a diabetic chocolate lab, a 2-year-old. My wife and I living in friends' basements in Colorado.
It was 9 months?
Yeah, 9 months of unemployment. And I didn't want to take a gig with anybody because my wife and I, even though my agent, even though like my parents, everybody was kind of like, I don't think this NFL thing's going to happen. They wouldn't go back and forth like this that much. And her and I stuck together and we're like, I think this is legit. Like, I think this is real. And I mean, we lived in Colorado with friends. My parents were down at spring training in Florida. So we went out to their house just so we could have our own property, our own place to live for like a couple of months in Philly. I almost got a job in Philly, Rob, but you beat me out.
Breakfast on Broad.
Yeah. And then I just kept waiting and kept like sticking with it. And other like little offers came around, and I don't know. I freelanced. It was like a dream come true next to Yuki at Channel 3. I was filling in for Beasley Reese.
The best.
And like Yuki was like, I'd known him my entire life.
Yeah.
And so like him throwing it to me to do sports was like the coolest thing.
What an honor.
In the world,
I did
right?
weekends at CBS 3 too back in the day. And I was like, am I sitting next to Yuki Washington?
Yeah, I was like, this is awesome. Real? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was like, this is crazy. But the whole time, even when I was freelancing at CBS, I was like, this NFL thing's going to work out. I don't know why. Maybe my wife and I were just dumb or persistent, but we just kept sticking with it. And they finally called and were like, it's not happening. It's over. It's done. I was like, all right. The next day they call back and go, can you be in LA tomorrow for an audition? I'm like, what just happened?
What is that?
I have no idea. But in like 48 hours, it went from our dreams are officially crushed to we have to go to J.C. Penney's and find a new suit or something to go do this audition. I flew from Philly out to L.A. in our old studio in Culver City, and I auditioned with like, I think I was the only person that got hired. There was like 10 on-air people, like 15 players, like Brandon Stokely and all these.
That's nerve-wracking, by the way. Like I've been through. It's really hard
because you run through the car wash. It's like one person after the next, the next. So I like did a bunch of like work. Like I almost like I called sources and stuff like I was actually already hired. And so when they asked me the questions, it wasn't like I was just like kind of like running through it. I was like, I talked to so and so yesterday, and they told me blank, blank, and blank. Huge. And I was like,
very.
So smart. Went with that, and then finally they were like. The day before Mother's Day, I remember this. They called me and they're like, "An offer's coming." My agent was like, "An offer's coming." I was like, "Bang! I gotta get to my wife on Mother's Day." She already moved back to Colorado. She was done living in Philly. So I remember my son went back to Colorado. I drove through the day to get there on Mother's Day to reunite with them. She was living with her sister for a little bit.
Right.
Family stuff happened that she needed to get back for, and like it all came together on Mother's Day that we were gonna be at NFL Network, and now we're going into our I think ninth season at NFL Network.
I think
now?
like since 15, right? You've been there? Oh
my
gosh, that's amazing. So it's a great story in faith in yourself and perseverance. And I'll tell you the other thing, it's critical to have a partner who has faith in you too. Because, let's face it, James, if your wife was kind of like, look, we got to pull the plug on this. Like you're probably doing something else. You're probably not sitting here right now.
100%. If she didn't have faith in how much I love this job and how much I love doing it, another woman, and I wouldn't have been upset with anybody else, or if her decision would have been, you need to start providing for your family. You got to get a job in some other business.
Yeah.
And she was like, no, we're going to do this. We're going to work through it. It's going to be part of our journey. And we're going to figure this out. And she was behind me 100% of the way. Cause she's like, I know you love this. When we were in Philly, we obviously had no health benefits.
Yeah.
And we got a 2-year-old. She worked at Starbucks on the main line serving Jay Wright every morning, so we could have benefits. Like, wow. She's like, I'll go work at Starbucks so we can get benefits.
She's a gamer, man.
So she's a keeper, man. She's awesome.
Yeah, nice.
Awesome.
All right, well, that's awesome. So you got the gig, you got sort of the dream gig, and after a lot of ups and downs, once you get there, how much did the Texans experience? Obviously, all of your experience, but like the reporter part of it serve you, where you kind of not skip much of a beat, and then kind of dig into what you're doing now.
Well, what was huge is Michelle Beisner had left and went to ESPN, and she was living in Denver. She was the NFL Network's Denver correspondent. And so I was like, hey, guys, you don't have anybody that's covering Peyton Manning.
Right.
And Gary Kubiak and his entire staff with Wade Phillips and Rick Dennison and all the guys that were part of that staff in Houston were now the new coaching staff in Denver. So I was like, first press conference, Coobs is up there and he sees me. He's like, I was like, I'm here now. It was such a great transition. Wade Phillips was great to meet all those guys. And so that made it actually easier.
Yeah.
And with Peyton being there, I wasn't in a role like I am now where I'm covering the entire league and it's a different game in a different city every single week. The Broncos were phenomenal.
Yeah, you were the Broncos beat guy.
Yeah, they won the Super Bowl. It was like I was back on a beat. So that 15-year, I was almost in Denver exclusively that first season because the Broncos were so relevant. Manning gets hurt, if you remember. Well, actually, I was at the game. Oh, it was so awful. I'm at the game. He breaks the record for, I think it was for completions, NFL completions. Yeah. And he threw 4 picks in that game and got pulled by Gary Kubiak. It was the worst celebration of an all-time NFL record, and he gets pulled because he's just playing terrible. But he's also had the Liz Frank in his foot, and he was struggling. So it was just storyline after storyline, and so I was just there with a staff that I had already covered extensively. So that it was almost just luckily I got eased in that first year as a national correspondent with a coaching staff I was with all the time and covering one of the greatest players of all time. So I didn't really leave. Then after that 15 season, I started going to New England a bunch and covering Brady. And then it took off to going everywhere after that. So I did get eased in, I think, that first year, which was a huge, luck of the draw in that sense.
How much, I always assume, especially when you're a reporter, you're getting inside stuff, you're putting the amount of work in, it's the phone is just on fire 24/7. Is it like that? I mean, is it as crazy as we think it is? I mean, we see Adam Schefter on there and texting right on the air and is it that nuts?
Yeah. I mean, listen, I like to say it kind of is at certain times. Free agency is like that. Free agency is definitely like that. The draft leading into the draft is like that. The draft, you just try to talk to as many people as possible about prospects so you get as fair of an assessment as you can. Free agency is hectic as hell, even leading into it. And during the season, there's so much TV hits. I like to get great stories. I break news, not as much as Tom or Ian at our place, but if I can on Sunday morning when Rich Eisen or somebody or Kurt Warner throws it to me and I can tell everybody a story that nobody has heard from the week of how Team X got ready for the game or keep an eye that I remember I did it I don't know why this just jumped in my head. I broke Joe Burrow started calling all the plays at the line of scrimmage halfway through the year last year. I found that out. And I was take a look at week 6 when everything changed. Blah, 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 blah. This is because Joe's calling, getting a chance to do those things and finding the right people to trust. I think now it's become just which relationships do I really, really value around the league? And those are the ones that I lean on. And those are the ones that can put me in touch with, hey, I know you won't burn us on this. Let me put you in touch with so-and-so. And that's what kind of goes. So it's not the phone's never, is ringing off the hook all the time, but it is now you have a much quicker way to what you're looking for than you did 10 years ago. At least
how much, I want to ask you about some present day stuff too, but you have the great ability to be someone who's from the area of Philadelphia, but also covers it on a national level. So you see all teams, how all teams are. Mm-hmm. You look at this journey that the Eagles have been on of late and Howie Roseman from when Chip Kelly was here and when he was, put aside and come back. I don't know that there's a comp to this, James, where it's been a guy is almost forgotten about and he comes back with this kind of vengeance. Is there any comp there, really?
I mean, off the top of my head, not really. Because just the sheer fact of going to multiple Super Bowls in the span that they have with completely different staffs and completely different quarterbacks is just unheard of, right? To change quarterbacks in that sense and kind of turn over a lot of your roster under one front office usually doesn't happen because sustained success is what we are used to seeing when things like that happen, right? And so there isn't change. To go through the amount of change that has happened in Philadelphia and get back to prominence that quickly, I can't think of a comp, specifically with the way Howie has done it. The way he's talked about around the league is pretty impressive. There's not a lot of compliments thrown out executive to an executive. Let's be honest. There's only 32 guys really doing this. But like the way he's thought of kind of his relentlessness is what everybody talks about in the league. Like other, GMs, other guys who I know from other teams who have come and now work for the Eagles are like, it never stops. Like it never stops, and it never stops because of Howie. And I think what the best example, honestly, I think of Howie is last offseason, because he used the entire duration of the offseason to improve the roster. And a lot of teams think it's draft. It's free agency. What do we get in that first week or two? And then what do we get in the draft? And then Howie at the end of the offseason in camp, he's getting James Bradbury and CJ Gardner-Johnson right before the start of the season. I think his mentality to always be looking for different avenues to improve sets him apart. What's happened in Philly over the last, it should be looked at probably deeper than probably people from the outside of Philly have.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Question, and we do our agree to disagree question, and you tell me which side you fall on this for every show. Eagles are still the team to beat in the NFC. Obviously you have the Niners. You still have the Cowboys are always in play here. There's other teams that made nice strides last year, Seattle, et cetera. Do you still feel like they're the team to beat in the NFC, the Eagles?
I do, because you could look at a lot of. It's really in most people around the league's mind, it's a 2-team race in the NFC, and it's them and the Niners. And both teams lose their defense coordinator. I think the world of D'Amico Ryans. I think D'Amico is a brilliant teacher and a brilliant football mind. Andy Reid has told me in the past he's maybe the smartest football player he's ever coached, and he coached him for a year. To get that kind of insight about D'Amico from Andy, and Andy was with him for only one season, shows you a lot about him. Both defenses are talented for sure. Both offenses are talented. I love the football team, the basketball team sense vibe of the skill players on both teams. The range of different guys from Kittle to Goddard to Debo to AJ there's so many comps that it's just a variety of skill sets that make both teams so good at their skill position players. I just think Jalen's better than Brock Purdy. I don't know if anybody's going to argue with me on that sense. Now, I will say, I think Kyle Shanahan is an unbelievable coach. And I've talked to people who have played for him, players have just been like, what makes him different? And quarterbacks that have played for him, what makes it like, there's an answer to everything. It is really, I hate to say this because it's like blasphemy, but playing the quarterback position for Kyle Shanahan can be easy at times. And playing the quarterback position is not easy by any stretch. It's the hardest position in all of sports, in my opinion. But the way he designs it for you throughout the week and the way he sets you up in your headset before you walk to the line of scrimmage, he can make it easy on you. He's that incredible of a coach. But I just think Jalen's better than Brock Purdy. And I don't think it's close.
Most important position in sports, that's for sure. All right, last one, James. Agree to disagree. Jalen Carter, most talented player in the draft. Now, we know there's baggage.
Oh, yeah.
Would you say most talented player that came out?
Yeah. I'm trying to think. Yeah, the only other guy that I honestly think just straight talent that's up there with him is like Bijan. Like Bijan's talent is he can do everything. I'm so excited to see the Falcons offense because they're
going to be interesting in general.
They're going to be so fun to watch.
Yeah.
Like I just think there's going to be entertainment. Like you got guys like you get Jonnu Smith's back with Arthur Smith, and then you got Cordell Patterson, you got Bijan, you got like I said, John
Algier, who had a real good year for them.
Yeah, Algier. And then you still got Kyle Pitts, and you got Drake London, and everybody can play in different spots. You can put guys in the backfield, move them everywhere. It's going to be super fun to watch. And Bijan plays a part in that because he's so versatile. Jalen there was talk that he would have been the first overall pick the year before if he was able to come out. The talent is through the roof. Now we just got to see what happens now that he's in the league. I've had plenty of teams. There were teams above the Eagles that were just never going to pick him. That I talked like I said that when I was in Philly for the draft. I was like,
yeah, you told me on one of my other shows. Yeah,
there are teams that they're not going to take him at all. And if you have the talent, and all of them told me it's not the talent. Trust me, the talent is through the roof. It's incredible. It's a talent that doesn't come along very often. Now let's see if all these Georgia guys that are there that can be with him. And I had a chance to talk with him for a little while, him and Nolan Smith. When I was there the next day when they got there, I got a little alone time with him, which was great. And it's going to be fun to watch. I'm curious what him and Jordan Davis together are going to be like, because I do sense, and this is no knock on Jordan, But I remember talking to guys like Hargraves and Fletch and stuff. They'd be like, he has no clue how good he can be. He doesn't even really know how to practice yet.
Right.
And so is it a positive or a negative that they're going to go through this together? Like, do you get what I'm saying, Rob?
Oh, I know.
It may not help them, honestly.
You know, what's funny? Like there's a debate whether or not it's a good thing that there's all these Georgia Bulldogs together, right? And some people say these guys have continuity. They intuitively know where the other guy's going to be and all that. And there's also, you wonder, maturity wise, is it almost going to be like back at the frat house? Like you do kind of
exactly.
Wonder.
And if we're talking about guys coming out that have unreal talent, but maybe lack some professionalism that they haven't established yet. Who's holding them accountable then? Like, I do think the Eagles are really, really good at drafting guys where there's already an established player there. I think Cam Jurgens is a perfect example of that. I think Jordan Davis was a good example of that. Now, how well did those guys, those vets that are all pros, Pro Bowlers, how well do they rub off and do? And it's not entirely their job to do that, but also does the younger guy listen? And if there's fewer of those veterans around and you got your boys with you, like, are you guys going to, sometimes you can see guys thrive in that environment. Now we're all together. Let's go prove something. Jalen told me he knows. I thought he had the perfect answer. I'll finish with this. When I asked him, I told him, I said, listen, there are enough people in this league I talked to that they were never going to draft you. And this had nothing to do with your on the field play. This had everything to do with everything that you know that they're questioning.
Yep.
Do you feel like you have something to prove to the NFL? And he immediately said, I don't have anything to prove to anybody other than the Eagles. Because they're the ones that are going to see me each and every day. Those coaches are going to see me every day, and that's who I need to prove something to. I thought that was the best way to answer that question, because you could have a chip on your shoulder and say, I want to prove it to the Falcons and the Seahawks and all these teams that are ahead of you, ahead of the Eagles that didn't pick you, that you have something to prove to them. And he was like, no, I need to prove it to the guys that actually picked me. And I do think that's a mature answer. Now we just got to see if he can go out and do it.
James, it's been great hearing the journey, man. What got you to where you are today? And like I said, I think you do an unbelievable job as a reporter.
Rob. Appreciate that.
And always love the insights. And we appreciate you giving us a couple minutes, man. Thank you very much.
I loved it. Go Vikings. South American. Let's go.
All right, you got it. That's James Palmer from the NFL Network. We're going to get a quick timeout in here. We'll come back. I'm going to kind of run the gamut of all the sports in Philadelphia when we return. Don't go anywhere. You're watching the Rob Ellis Show on the A2D Radio Network. Thank you, James.
Yep.
Hey, Birds fans, the NFL schedule has arrived and Phillies Sports Trips has all the details now. Visit the site phillysportstrips.com. This is sure to be an epic season. Be sure to go there now to make sure that you don't get shut out. Join us in Tampa, LA, Seattle, or when we get revenge in Kansas City. Don't want to fly? No problem. Gather up your crew and hop aboard one of our signature boisterous bus trips to DC or New York. Sign up now and make sure to mention A2D. Don't miss out on the best Philly fan experience anywhere. Philly Sports Trip customers always stay at the best hotels and meet NFL legends. Book today.
All right, we are back. Rob Ellis Show, A2D Radio. We just finished up with our guest this week, James Palmer. If you're new to the show, and this is our second show, we sit down each and every week with someone in the business and learn kind of the journey, go behind the scenes, what got them to where they are today. And James was great, man. That was a lot of fun. All right, so let's kind of jump around a little bit here, and this is something else we'll do within the body of the show. So, in Philadelphia sports in general, you know, the big thing right now, I would say, would be the Sixers and what's happening with them. They're in a really difficult spot for a lot of different reasons. Number one, we saw the way that their season concluded, and it was, you know, it's one thing if you lose to a team and you feel like you went just kind of back and forth with them, mano a mano, and you end up losing a tight game to a team that was favored to beat you anyway at their place in a game 7, you tip your hat. You're bummed out, you're disappointed, but you tip your hat a little bit. For the Sixers to lay down the way that they laid down in that manner, in that kind of setting, in that kind of big game, and we saw it in the last 5 minutes of game 6, makes me wonder if Joel Embiid and or James Harden, if he's going to be back, and I'll get to him in a second, have what it takes right here, have what it takes from a heart standpoint to be those guys that get you over the hump. And that is not a feeling that you want as a fan. You don't want to be questioning somebody's heart. And I think that's kind of where I'm at. Now, the way this went down, Doc Rivers is out. I was no Doc Rivers fan. I thought he did an okay job this year, but I'm not a fan of his in general. I don't think he adjusted well to Boston going big. I don't think he had a lot of counter punches. So I'm not crying any tears over Doc Rivers being out of here. But what concerns me here is it's going to turn into, well, this was just Doc Rivers' fault. Let's essentially run this thing back. And we all know that Daryl Morey's got a history with James Harden, and he is someone who I don't think sees a whole lot of faults in James Harden. And I think that's a big mistake. Like the numbers that are being thrown around 4 years, in the $50 million range, $200 million deal. No, thank you for James Harden. It is diminishing returns. He still had the ability this year, every once in a while, to crank up epic performances. And he was great in game 1. He was great in game 5, et cetera. He still had some big games, right? There's no denying that, but they're going to become less and less. And not having a lot of time off in between games is going to be more and more of a challenge, I think, for him to get going. But what worries me is, the rumors are at least that Daryl Morey was influenced by James Harden to move on from Doc Rivers. Now, if that's the case, it would make me think that they're going to prioritize bringing James Harden back more than anything else. Now, there's all kinds of stuff floating around from a lot of different sources that he may go back to Houston, that there's other teams in the NFL that are interested, et cetera, et cetera. But I feel like Daryl Morey, because of his blind spot for James Harden, is going to do anything he can to bring him back. And I think if that's the case, this team is in big trouble. I'll take it a step further. If they bring Harden back and Mike D'Antoni becomes the head coach, it would be an epic mistake. That guy is not a winner. He is someone who will crank up offense the way that James Harden wants it cranked up, but ultimately it'll be the same story. You get to the playoffs, you get to the second round, you aren't going to advance with a Mike D'Antoni team. So I think that would be a mistake. I would love it to be Nick Nurse. I would be okay with Monty Williams. They're fine choices as far as I'm concerned. But even if Harden walks, you have about $12 million in cap space. There's not a lot of wiggle room there. What you need to do is trade Tobias Harris, free up some money, and go out there and sign some guys who are diamonds in the rough. You look at what Miami's doing. It's Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, and a bunch of guys who weren't even drafted or were on two-way contracts. And they're diamonds in the rough because not only did they see something that fit their system, they were able to develop those guys along the way. That's something we haven't seen enough of or any of from the Sixers. This is where Daryl Morey, if he's the genius that people think he is, has to absolutely figure out. He's got to get that part of it together. So that's where I look at it from the Sixers standpoint. I wish I was more optimistic at where this was headed, but I don't feel overly optimistic when it comes to the Sixers. Now let's jump to the Phillies. It has been the ultimate roller coaster. Win 5, lose 5, win 6, lose 6, win 4, lose 4. They have been the model of inconsistency so far this year. And for a team that spent the amount of money that they spent, has the talent, I'm talking about lineup wise, and at least the top of the rotation and the bullpen that they have, it shouldn't look like this. Now, I truly believe from an offensive standpoint that this lineup is too darn good, that a guy like Trey Turner is too good traditionally career-wise for this kind of inconsistency and up and downness, if you will, to continue. I think the lineup will be okay. I think you're going to get more consistency from the bats, especially as we move into the summer months. Kyle Schwarber is typically much better in June and going forward. Trey Turner is much better in June and going forward. And I think there's a lot of positive signs with Bryson Stott and some others. Nick Castellanos has had an excellent year so far, and I had my real doubts about him. So I think from that standpoint, that's big. But what I really am concerned about is the starting rotation, because while it looks like Nola and Wheeler are starting to come on and they're pitching much better, up until this point, I would say they probably have been solid to good rather than very good to great. So they need to get better. But the problem is after them, you start to fall into the Ranger Suarez. Is he not quite ready yet? Taijuan Walker, who, has been another one who's been up and down, more down than up. And then you don't even have a fifth starter right now. So the starting rotation is a real concern. The good news is John Middleton is so committed to this team financially that I believe if Dave Dombrowski goes to him and says, look, we need to make a trade. We're going to give up a prospect and we're going to take on some salary here. I know we're already in the luxury tax area. Are you good with this? I think he would sign off on it because they clearly need another starter. I think you'll be able to survive some of the other things that they've been through from an injury standpoint. You'll get Derek Hall back at some point. Bryce Harper could take over first base at some point. Yeah, I think you'll be able to survive some of the other stuff. But as far as the starting pitching goes, I think there is a body needed there in that starting rotation. And that's something to watch out for. And look, the division hasn't played up to, I think, the standards that we thought it would, but it's a good division. I mean, when you're talking about the Braves and the Mets and, Miami is nothing to sneeze at either. They're not just going to lay down. You're going to have to get your act together, not only in that division, but in that National League as well. So that's where things are from the Phillies standpoint. I do think they will start playing more consistent baseball, but I think they may need to add an arm sooner rather than later. Like, I don't know that you can wait until the trade deadline with this one till the end of July. This might be something that you have to do in June, but we'll see how that plays out. Flyers, we haven't really had an opportunity to speak on them. And, I think the Keith Jones and Danny Briere moves are interesting ones. I think first and foremost, it brings interest back to an organization that had lost it wholly. I mean, just completely irrelevant. They bring that back, which is important. I mean, it is a business and you want interest in a business. But more importantly, I think Keith Jones' background as a broadcaster of both local and national games and as a studio guy nationally gave him the kind of access that he talks to everybody in the league. Every scout, every coach, every player, every GM. He knows these teams. He knows these players. He knows what players can and can't play. He knows what guys are buried on a bench. He knows what guys to avoid. He talks to people who follow the draft very closely, scouts and whatnot. That will aid the Flyers greatly in what is a critical draft for them. So I think the Keith Jones move, although some people may say, oh my God, here we go again with a Flyer, a former Flyer. This is different because he's had the national perspective. He's not just in the bubble of the Flyers. And Danny Briere, to me, and he'll work in conjunction with Keith Jones and John Tortorella. Danny Briere, to me, is a very interesting hire or elevation. They took off the interim tag because Danny Briere played the game, obviously, at a high level, but he's also been groomed to do this. And I think he knows very well some of the mistakes that occurred prior to him, from his predecessors. And I think he knows not to go down that road. There's also another face in the organization, and it's Dan Hilferty. Whereas before, fans, just want someone that they can associate with this team and say, who is this person? So with the Flyers, and they've been very smart. Keith Jones has done a lot of media since taking the job over. He's been very smart, I think, very smart in telling people that this is going to be a slow process. Now, the way that it gets sped up a little bit is if you draft well. You do have a goalie in Carter Hart, and that part of it is big. But playing the slow card, if you will, that they've been saying, hey, look, we're not going to be able to turn this around overnight. Understand that, I think, is a good way to go. You kind of tamper the expectations a little bit while making it a little more interesting for the Flyers fan base. Lastly, with the Eagles, we're in that in-between period right now. OTA starting up next week, and then camp before you know it. But we're in that time period where you kind of sit back and reflect a little bit, and you look at the team, you say to yourself, all right, how much better are they now than when the season ended? And you lost an offensive coordinator, you lost a defensive coordinator, a linebackers coach, a secondary coach. You've lost some pieces, a couple players here and there as well. I think from an offensive standpoint, they should hit the ground running this year. You have the continuity of Brian Johnson taking this thing over as the offensive coordinator. You have Jalen Hurts with another year of experience where he went all the way to a Super Bowl. You really didn't lose a ton. Yes, Miles Sanders had a nice year for them, and they lost Isaac Seumalo. But other than that, you still return 2,000-yard receivers, a really good tight end, a quarterback who was a runner-up for the MVP, and an offensive line that essentially, other than the one guard spot, which you're going to have to figure out, most likely to be Juergens, maybe Steen, that is arguably the best in football, coached by the best offensive line coach in football. No small feat. That's a big deal. I think the defensive side of the ball is the one where Eagles fans are going to have some patience. Again, the P word, but they're going to have some patience because it's not going to look the same right away. You have a new coordinator. You lost Javon Hargrave. You lost CJ GJ. You have basically 2 new safeties, 2 new linebackers. And you're going to be counting on some players last year who basically redshirted: Jordan Davis, Nakobe Dean, and some others. But I think Jalen Carter, who we discussed a little bit earlier with James Palmer, is going to step in and be an every down defensive tackle and be an absolute beast. He may not be that beast game one, but I think by midway through the season, I think Jordan Davis, with a year under his belt, is going to show you what he is. But I think it's going to take a little while, and you're not going to get to the quarterback quite as much as you did last year. Now, I still think they're going to be up there, top 5 in sack totals. I still think they're going to be a big-time team as far as that goes. But that's going to be the biggest thing for me, is watching how this team develops, because they need to get off to a quick start. The schedule is challenging. And the piece of it beyond the bye is just flat nasty. So you're going to want to build some equity early with wins and bank some of that, because later it's going to be more of a challenge. Now, they may have a worse record than they did last year, but it doesn't mean they're a worse team. They could be even more playoff tested and ready because of this difficult schedule than they were last year, when it was a little bit of an easier schedule. So look, it's the beauty of Philadelphia sports is there is always interesting storylines and always interesting things to talk about. That's for sure. All right. I appreciate you hanging out. I had a blast. I hope you did as well. We'll keep this rolling each and every week with the Rob Ellis Show on the A2D radio. And like I said, the gist of the show is we'll do this kind of stuff where we're jumping around, but we get to sit down every week with somebody in the business and get to know their journey. So I appreciate you guys hanging out. I'm looking forward to next week. I am Rob Ellis. Thanks for tuning in.